joining me tonight. We are making a coat rack for our first kind of how-to video. So I'm going to show you guys how to make this. Is a very simple project. It's basically going to teach you the very basic things in the woodworking that I do. So I started with a board. I'm only making a 3-foot coat rack, but this board is much longer. So the first thing to do is just to cut it down. And now I'll take it over to the chop saw. So when you're lining it up on the chop saw, you basically just want to make sure that your edge is pushed flat against the rail of the saw. And then this saw has a light which makes the shadow. So I, without pulling the trigger, just pull it down, and then I kind of want, if I wanted exactly 3 feet, I had marked this at 3 feet. So I want the shadow just to the left of the line, and then I'll cut through. Okay, so the next thing is just to sand this thing. We have some stamps that we need to make sure come off, and then basically I'm just going to try and put a little bit of a curve on the edges and make sure it's nice and smooth and even. So I like to use a 120 grit sandpaper for finishing my furniture. If it's a really rough board, I'll use an 80 grit just to take it down the first layer, and then I will always finish with the 120. That will give it a nice clean finish. I'm also not too worried about getting it completely smooth. I do like to leave some of the character in the wood, but that's really just a personal preference, so whatever you find that you like the looks of. The trick here is you don't want to push too hard. If you push too hard, you're going to get the circle marks in your wood, but you'll learn as you go how to put just the perfect amount of pressure. The other tip that I have is just continually moving your hand so that it's never staying in one spot. When you do the edges, you'll see I'm always constantly moving. I don't ever stay in one spot because you'll just gouge your wood. This is pretty soft wood. This is just spruce wood. So yeah, let's do this. Because this is a beginner video, I want to just show you what an unsanded piece of wood looks like compared to your finished sanded piece. So just to make sure that you're comfortable with knowing when you've done it up. So this is our sanded piece. It's lighter. You notice that on the piece that has not been sanded, it's got a bit of a shine to it. And that's just how the wood comes from the lumberyard. There's obviously stickers, it's a bit darker, and the edges here are really sharp. Here you can see I try and round all edges. They're not super round, but they're not sharp. So I just want to show you what we're going to use for adding the stain to it. So we're going to do a nice medium brown. It's called Provincial Stain, and I like to use, I love these Minwax oil-based stains. This is, you can see this, you can just get these at Rona, Home Depot, anywhere like that. And then I like to use, for staining, I like to use a 2-inch flat brush. For lacquering, I like to use a different brush. And then I also like to have my rag in my other hand, and of course, some rubber gloves, or plastic gloves, whatever you want to call these. Something to protect your hands because the stain will not come off easily. All right, so let's crack open this can. And this was recently stirred, so I don't need to worry too much about it, but I will make sure that there's no, sometimes you feel that it's thicker at the bottom, so you just want to make sure that it's all nice and evenly mixed. And I'm just going to wipe it on my rag. So I like to apply the stain first with the brush, and then just to wipe off the excess with the rag. So just dip a little on and just brush it, and then you can just spread it. All right, so the back's done. I'm going to flip it over. All right, so that's all we can do tonight. We need to let this dry. I like to do, I would say like 12 to 24 hours at least, to just let it soak in, and then we can add our lacquer tomorrow, and then we'll put the hooks on, and then that's basically it. So yeah, you can just see that it's a nice color brown, and it's to look even better with some lacquer on it, and then the hooks that will be in at the end. We're ready to start our lacquering now. So it's all stained, ready to put some lacquer on, which is our top coat. And first you just want to make sure you start with a clean surface, that there's no fresh dust flying in the air, because that will make a difference in, it will settle and stick to your lacquer before it dries. So we're just clean surface. Now we're just going to quickly dust off our project, both sides. Now for lacquer, I like to use this Varathane Diamond Wood finish. It's a water-based, and I use a satin finish. So that's not too glossy, but it's also not a matte. This is a great product. It's also quick dry. So just pop that open. This one you want to mix quite well. And you also don't want to create any bubbles by mixing, so mix it gently. And then the brush I like to use for my lacquer is, again, a flat brush, and I like a 3-inch brush. And you want to just find one that doesn't shed the bristles, because the worst thing is when you have a bunch of bristles in your piece. So you're just going to dip a little bit of the lacquer on your brush. And then again, I like to do the sides before I kind of finish on the front, on the top surface. You're just going to gently apply the lacquer. And you basically just want to, you don't want to leave any big globs of the lacquer. And then when I do the edges, just applying them gently, and then just make sure that you go back and get each edge, because when you paint over the edges, over the corners, sometimes the bind will get a glob. So you just want to go back over it and make sure that you've gotten everything. So here we go. Okay, so the first coat is done, and now we just need to wait to apply the next coat. So it takes about, I like to give it about 1 hour to 2 hours until it's kind of ready to touch. Sometimes it will be quicker depending on the temperature, but if you touch it and it feels dry, it's ready to go on to your next one. So now you can take a break, go for a run, grab a coffee, play with your kids, do some shopping, whatever you want to do. We'll check back in a bit. Okay, so the first coat is dry, and now we're ready to put on our second coat. But before we do that, just to make sure you give it the smoothest finish that you can, I sand it with very fine sandpaper. You don't need to use a sanding block, you can just use the paper, but this is nice and easy. So you just go ahead and just do like a very quick once over with the sanding paper, and then again just removing any debris with you can even use a damp cloth, that works really well to pick up the really fine dust. And then we're ready to go for our second coat. So here's what it looks like when it's wet. It is a little bit opaque, but that will dry translucent, so you don't need to worry about it. But there's no big globs or anything. So the second coat of lacquer is done, and for this project I think we only need 2 coats. I would use more if we were doing a table or something, but this is just for a coat rack. So next thing we're going to do is put on the hook. So this is the final step in the project, and I just picked up these very basic hooks from Rona, and just nice black ones. So the first step is to mark out the distance between the hooks. So I have 6 hooks that are going on this board, and it's 36 inches long, so I'm just going to go and mark out an even space between them. Alright. So I'm just going to put this at 1.5 inches up from the bottom and hold it against my speed square, and then put my screw in, hold it here, and then just screw it in. And that's good. And then just make sure that this is straight. Perfect. And then I can put in the second screw. Okay, so let's go ahead and put the rest of the hooks on. it's all done. The hooks are on. It's ready to be hung up in your house. Functional, easy, simple. That's how I like it. Thank you guys so much for joining me for this project. I did teach this one at a slower pace because this is a beginner one. Some of the projects in the future will move much quicker, and if you need to reference the basics, you can turn back to this project. Please, I really want your feedback. I appreciate any thoughts, comments, questions, suggestions, requests, and yeah, I look forward to our next project with you.